So today I'll be presenting about the Great Leap Forward, which happened between 1958 and 1961. So I'll start introducing what was happening to China before the Great Leap Forward, and I'll talk about the first 5 year plan as it's related to the second 5 year plan, which is called the Great Leap Forward. And then I'll focus my presentation on the Great Leap Forward's intention and what happened during that period. So in 1945, China was under a big civil war where the nationalists fought against the communists for power until 1949, when Mao Zedong, which was the chairman of the Communist Party, received more public support and he was able to found the People's Republic of China. So at that time, China was politically weak, traditional, and lacking in industry. So Mao wanted to modernize China to compete with its rivals, United States, England, and Russia. So in 1952, he introduced the first 5 year plan, which was a copy of the Soviet model of industrialization, aiming in heavy investment in industry as an attempt to increase the production. The problem here was that 4/5 of the Chinese population lived in rural areas, so there was not enough people working in the industry to be able to grow it to the desired levels. And also, the agricultural output was not high enough to keep everyone fed, including the workers in the factories. So Mao turned his attention to the countryside. As I mentioned before, rural China was very traditional, where the peasants worked the land in small family groups, keeping most of the harvest and selling only small amounts. So, since Mao was seeking to build a communist society where everyone worked for the state, he proposed a land reform through collectivization, which means that the peasants they lost their pieces of land and worked in communes for wages, and communes were the names given to the lands owned by the state. So Mao didn't believe this was enough to expand both agricultural and industrial production in parallel. So in 1958, he proposed the second 5 year plan, which is the Great Leap Forward. So now the Soviet model of development was rejected, and the agricultural and political decisions were a little bit more decentralized, which means that the communes were now managed by local officials. The Great Leap Forward was designed to get laborers in the countryside working at full capacity, producing agricultural surplus which could be forcibly purchased by the government to export and feed the industrial workers. And the plan also aimed at organizing rural workers to directly contribute to industrial production. To achieve all these objectives, communes were adopted on a vast scale, with 20,000 people or more working on a single commune, and the organizations of communes provided child care facilities and houses for the elderly in order to free up more workers. And the Great Leap Forward was also backed by propaganda, which encouraged people to contribute however they could, such as banging pots to prevent birds from eating crops or sometimes even shooting them. And under the slogan of walking on two legs, agricultural workers were drafted from their jobs to work on the countryside factories. So, towards the beginning of 1958, things seemed to be going well, and agricultural workers were supportive of the Great Leap Forward, especially because of the readily available food in the commune kitchens, regardless of how much work one had done. However, the reality was hidden by the uncommonly good weather of that year, which led to high levels of agricultural production. So, by the end of 1958, which was the first year of the Great Leap Forward, things started to turn around. The local officers that managed the communes noticed that over optimism led rural workers eating too much of the harvest, which led stockpiles dangerously low for the following years. A large proportion of the laborers lacked incentive to work on the large communes, and transport and supply problems were also causing some issues along the way. The steel produced by the rural laborers was found to be unusable, and drafting too many workers to the factories caused a shortage of labor in the farms. Also, Scaring or shooting the birds caused a severe ecological imbalance, which increased the vermin population that ate a lot of the crops. So at this point, the agricultural output was not high as expected, and Mao began to talk about scaling back the Great Leap Forward, and he ordered purges to those that criticized his decisions. These led to local officials supporting even more keenly the Great Leap Forward and continuing to send a large proportion of the grains that did remain to the cities. So imagine this, the agricultural output was not high, and local officials were sending the grains that remained to the cities, so rural workers had barely no food. The consequence of this was a terrible starvation in the countryside, which then lowered the agricultural output even more, soon leading to a terrible starvation in the cities as well. So, I'm not going to get into too much detail on the consequences of the starvation, but it is estimated that 18 million people to 45 million people died. Mao was held responsible for this catastrophe by many people within the Chinese Communist Party, but still remained chairman. And the communes were scaled back, individual farming was again permitted, and industrial workers were given greater incentives to work hard. So, after all this, Mao remained a powerful figure in China, and he was able to launch the Cultural Revolution in 1966. So, I know this was a lot of information, but this concludes my presentation for the Great Leap Forward, and thank you for listening.